Good artists get inspired. Great artists steal. And for that reason, I am using recipe by the Hive Studio for yellow armor. I will talk about him at the end of the video. Now, let's paint. Because I will be working with an airbrush, I'm first sticking all sub-assembled parts to little pins, so I can cover them properly with paint. You don't have to prime this Imperial Fist with an airbrush. I have used regular primer. After priming, I got Vallejo Stonewall Grey, and I will airbrush all of pinned parts. Since I'm not using dedicated airbrush colors, I will have to mix them with airbrush solution, and for mixing, I'm using a brush that I don't really care about. With the same brush, I will also get the color from the pot to the airbrush. I would recommend checking whether you are happy or not with what you got by spraying something you don't care about. When you are sure, just spray all the parts and make a nice, even layer. For shading, I'm gonna use charred brown and mix it in the same manner as the previous color. You don't want to cover the whole area now, but spray from the bottom just so you can create a shade. If you apply it on top, the yellow color won't be that well visible and will not be that vibrant. With Moon Yellow, I will follow the same process of mixing, and I will spray it just on the top and middle section of all parts. You don't have to leave any gray color there, but if you do, it is gonna be covered later. With Gold Yellow, I will do the same process for mixing, and this time you wanna have less pigment in there and a little more of your solution. I will now focus mainly on the middle section of the armor. This will somewhat smoothen the transition between really light yellow and really dark brown. Here is a quick comparison between the piece with gold yellow and without it. When you finish working with your airbrush or when you are switching between paints, always clean it at the very least by just putting there your solution and spraying it out. That way, any leftover paint will get out too. And this is what you got so far. We got some great gradient, but to shade it further, I will put in my airbrush Furgen Orange, or I hope that's how it's pronounced, straight out of bottle and spray it in similar manner as I have sprayed the brown. All you wanna do is just cover the bottom part and a little bit of yellow to smoothen out the gradient. Here are the results of our airbrushing efforts. Now I will move on to regular brushes and make my wet palette. Put down a piece of toilet paper, get some water in there, and cut out some parchment paper, and put it in there too. In order to stop it from rolling, you want to make it wet from all sides, so spread it first and afterwards flip it. With Abaddon Black, I will go on and cover his armpits and forearm pits. Chances are that no one is really gonna look at his armpits, but I wanna make sure for my comfort that the yellow is not visible there. Repeat this step for the rest of the recesses between the armor, like his neck, the little cables on his helmet, but also apply it on his lenses to prepare them for additional layers. I recommend being super careful here, because if you get black on yellow, it is gonna be hard to fix. With this step done, I am painting rims of his shoulder pads with Mephiston Red. To highlight these rims, I picked Fire Dragon Bright and carefully highlighted just the edges. Minor corrections can be easily done with Mephiston Red again. Be especially careful with the inner edge, because there is higher probability of hitting the yellow area. Along the way, I have made a minor mistake. but I will simply put down there a purity seal later to hide it, which is what I recommend doing when you mess up anything Imperial, really. Now with Khorne red, I will base coat his chest symbol, and again I am being really careful not to hit any yellow space. After that, I will use Aegrek's Earthshade on the symbol, and I will even go a little over the edges to create a separation between the yellow and the symbol. At this point you can easily just add white to the Khorne red, or just use Emperor's Children and start highlighting the edges here. With even more white added, I'm highlighting even smaller outer edges of the symbol. Now what I'm gonna do is the bolter, but I have actually a full tutorial on how to paint bolter really well, so you can check out that video if you want. Here I will try to make this description as short as possible. So combine Dark Reaper and Abaddon Black and base coat the bolter casing with multiple thin coats. The first highlight is gonna be just pure Dark Reaper on all the edges. There's also gonna be the second edge highlight, where I simply add Celestar Grey. With pure Celestar Grey, I am putting down a dot on each edge corner to make it pop. Coming back to my Celestar Grey and Dark Reaper mix to create some scratches on the casing. With the casing done, put down a lead belcher on all the metallic parts. Right after that, I will wash just the metallics with Noon Oil. Once dry, the edges are gonna be highlighted with Runefang Steel. There are also some bullets visible, so I covered them in Retributor armor. To finish the bolter, I will paint this little symbol with Ushabti Bone, wash it with Aegrek's Earthshade, and highlight the edges with Screaming Skull. And if you want, you can add a little bit of white and highlight just the very outer edges. It is time to put down your first layer of blue on these lenses. Try to retain a small black line that will separate the lens and the yellow armor. The second layer is gonna be Ahriman Blue. The same applies, but you want to keep the paint just in the inner half of the lens. For the last inner quarter of the lens, use Fenrisian Grey. To finish this nice lens, put there a little white dot to the outer quarter. And this is what you get. So now I want to finish all the little details, starting with the metallics. For those I'm using lead belcher. I'm saying it for like 4th time already, but be careful not to stain anything other than metallic parts. As always with metallics, I am using Noon Oil to shade them. The edge highlights are gonna be done with Runefang Steel. Now we will get back to the recesses. With Thunderhawk Blue you will paint the edges of black areas that we have painted in the first step after airbrushing. That means all the pits, cables on the helmet and such. At this point I wanted to finish his torso, so I go to Reneg's Height and put down 2 layers on this carry pack. Afterwards I glaze this carry pack with Bugman's Glow towards the edges of it. This will imitate the rough, leathery surface. Then I will finish it with edge highlight of Bugman's Glow without watering it down too much. Those little metallic buttons can be painted with any metallic color, so pick the one you like. To create sort of illusion of a hole for his neck, I have came back to Abaddon Black and painted it there. Before gluing all the parts together, I'm just carefully removing all the pins, but you can keep the one on the leg, as you will still spray the model. And if you are already happy with how this Imperial Fist looks, that's alright, just get him on a base and you are good to go. However, I still wanna shade the recesses between his panels and do some edge highlights. For those, I come back to Moon Yellow and put them just on top edges that are most visible. Since I was happy with my edge highlights now, I used Vallejo airbrush gloss varnish and sprayed it all over my Space Marine. And this step is super important because if you didn't varnish this guy, oil wash that we are gonna use in the next step is gonna damage his paint job. After checking if the model is dry, I am mixing oil paints together with odorless white spirit to make a wash that will stay just in the recesses. White spirit is the exact ingredient that could potentially damage your paint job. Before applying, make sure that the pigment and the white spirit is well mixed. You probably don't want little chunks of pigment staying on the armor. I have also decided to add a little bit of black pigment to make it darker. After mixing it once more, we are ready to apply it just to the recesses. As you can see on the screen, the wash spreads really well along the recess area. This is not only because of the oil wash itself, but also because of the gloss varnish. Just look at this shoulder pad and watch the oil wash spread out along those recesses. This will save us so much time, especially on the bright colors like yellow. Now if you mess up along the way, you can either wipe it off with your finger or dip a little bit of toilet paper into white spirit and fix it with that. Alright, the Space Marine is now basically finished. You can also compare this to the version which is not oil washed and decide for yourself which one you like more. Of course, you don't want glossy Space Marine armor, so we will fix that later. However, before applying matte varnish, I will get some decals on his shoulder pads. To soften the decals, I am using microset solution. I basically just dip it in there for like 10 to 20 seconds and move the decal on the shoulder pad with my brush. Before doing anything else, position the decal in the middle using either your fingers or the brush. When it's in place, I push out any air underneath with my thumb and some toilet paper. Since I didn't have a black tactical arrow, I used this white one as a canvas for me to paint on. After finishing this step, I have glued on two purity seals, one on his leg and one on his shoulder pad. And since this video is already quite long, I will show you how to paint the purity seals in a different one, so don't worry. And finally, I will varnish my Imperial Fist Space Marine with matte varnish from Vallejo. Try to spray it as evenly as possible and do not leave out any glossy area. With Sterland Mud, I will create standard muddy base. Slap some on there, but not too much. Usually I apply my texture paint on wet palette first to get some control over it, but in this case there is no model on the base, so I don't need that kind of control. After that, spread it somewhat evenly, but naturally, so it looks like mud. Sometimes I even touch it when it's drying, so it is more natural looking. When fully dry, slap some Aegir's Earthshade on there. Then take Risa dust, wipe some off from your brush and dry brush it heavily. This may also take more than one layer. I will do the same with Ushabti Bone, but in this case the dry brushing is gonna be way lighter. Finish the base by painting the edges with 2 coats of black or whatever color you want it to be. And it is finally time to glue my Imperial Fist Space Marine to the base. By applying these green tufts, not only is the base gonna be nicer, but there is gonna be cool contrast between the armor and the green color. Okay guys, this is the video. If you like it, give it a thumbs up, so the Emperor will bless me and will shove this video in front of others. And if you want to see more, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and leave any suggestions in the comments. Also thank you to the Hive Studio, because I have used that tutorial for this yellow armor, so I will link this tutorial in the description. And on his website you will actually see many more tutorials how to paint Space Marines with an airbrush quite efficiently. Alright, that's it. See you guys in the next one. Bye!